Since both my video series on the 10 unproduced Clone Wars arcs that we never got, as well as the 3 story arcs that were later produced for release in 2020 post the show's 2013 cancellation, there have been several updates regarding aspects of them. I will only be covering things I can verify are true, so I will not be including supposed leaks from Reddit or other sites here that I cannot verify came from a proper, credible source. The Bounty Hunter arc has had the biggest update of all of them regarding new information. That being that Dave Filoni and Athena Portillo, who was the line producer during the original production, showed us another Z-Viz clip from the story arc at Celebration Japan in 2025. Here we got to see that not only did Boba get to use a jetpack with his original trilogy armor within this story arc, but that Cad Bane had in fact manipulated him into trying to assassinate Mace Windu yet again, with this ultimately leading him to have to flee from a pursuing Anakin. Again, like with the other clips we have seen from this story arc, it has been fully voiced by the voice actors including Corey Burton, Seth Green, Daniel Logan, Matt Lanter, and T.C. Carson, with it being in the same state of pre-animation stage where it already had been sequenced and edited, as well as started to get its final high-quality models created, which we know had since been sourced for other projects like Rebels and The Bad Batch. The clip confirmed that the story arc has to take place during the Clone Wars, considering it involves key Jedi characters not around afterwards, fully dispelling the chances of it getting adapted into a post-Clone Wars show like some people thought The Bad Batch would do during its production. It also noticeably used Anakin's B design, which debuted all the way back in Season 3. This was most likely going to be its last appearance, as we know that the following story arc, Crystal Crisis on Utapau, besides debuting the 6th production season, also created new C designs for both Anakin and Obi-Wan. Mace Windu, unsurprisingly, still has his original appearance with his clone wrist armor, considering that was also going to be the case had the original version of the Bad Batch arc been produced, due to cloth simulation being more taxing to pull off in the original production. This clip makes me reevaluate what I think happens in each of the 4 episodes, with the first CW522 being what was focused on in the Untold Clone Wars panel in 2015, where Cad Bane mentors Boba Fett into how to be a good bounty hunter by taking a job to rescue a child from Tusken Raiders, with the plot of the episode being inspired by the 1956 western The Searchers. Dave Filoni described Cad Bane at the Celebration 2025 panel as the bad father compared to Jango, who was the good father, and with Jango now gone, Boba only had Cad Bane left, with Bane himself trying to shape Boba into where Jango was when he died in order to test if he is better than him. The second episode is still the one with the least information, but we know for a fact, thanks to the design asset for the spirit of the Kessel created by Amy Beth Christensen, that is labelled to CW523, aka the production code for the second episode. It was meant to be the location's first on-screen depiction, coming directly from a project overseen by George Lucas, with himself having vastly developed the overall lore for Kessel during the work that had been done for Star Wars Underworld. My theory is that due to Hondo having the Slave One, as we last saw in CW425 A Necessary Bond, is that we get a full circle moment where Hondo hires Boba's crew of bounty hunters to steal spice from Kessel so he can sell it to pay to fix his base on Florum, which Grievous had wrecked. The full circle moment being that the first time we saw Hondo, he wanted a payment in spice for capturing Dooku. This would give the episode a heist-esque theme with lots of action, which is something writer Matt Michnovitz liked to have in the story arcs he chose to personally write. With this also being the last story arc to have had Christian Taylor as a head writer on, before Michnovitz would replace him as head writer for production season 6 and 7. CW524 seems to be the episode we got the latest clip from, with it being past the halfway point, which was likely to be when Boba had recovered his father's armour from the Slave One after Hondo returned it to him, with Daniel Logan having confirmed at SpaceCon 2025 after the celebration panel that an element of the story arc involved him getting his father's armour back and would have answered the questions surrounding him seemingly blowing up Jango's helmet in Season 2. We also have that production photo of a Zevis sequence for this episode, which seems to take place at the start of it, with Cad Bane talking to Dengar, Latz and Embo on Tatooine, and based on those two, I feel like the episode has the bounty hunters take a job from Dooku to break out some of the Separatist leaders from Republic custody, including specifically Wat Tambor, who has somehow been freed by the Bad Batch arc, which is only 4 story arcs later production-wise, and we know that they didn't forget that the character was in Republic custody, as he was seen on a view screen in prison within Ahsoka's production Season 5 story arc, with Minions Reckonwares being where they buy the droid Ruckle, who could be specialised in pulling off a job like this, in a similar vein to how Cad Bane used Todo 360 in CW123 Holocron Heist. I think it also makes sense that Cad Bane would use this situation to manipulate Boba into attacking Mace Windu again, which brings Boba's arc full circle from his Clone Wars debut in Season 2, with this being the pinnacle moment for Boba, in that the last thing Jango did was fight Mace Windu. This could also lead to Mace, who initially not knowing who attacked him, finding out by the end of the episode that it was Boba, and his actions of killing Jango had led his son down a dark path, being unaware that Cad Bane is behind it. And while we know that Mace ultimately had his Revenge of the Sith fate, it would still leave a lingering effect of Mace feeling guilty for Boba's life trajectory. Also, on a thematic note, this story arc seems to mirror the Son of Dathomir one in terms of having 3 episodes following villain-esque characters, while also having one that involves the Jedi, with CW623 Proxy War also ending with the Jedi misunderstanding a situation due to not having all the pieces. Only that time it's them thinking Count Dooku and Maul are the 2 Sith Lords. Both arcs are also the final ones of each of their respective production seasons. The final episode, CW525, is the one involving Sierra Leonis and a Hutt carrier ship. Since I did the Bounty Hunter arc video, I did some more research and came across the Sierra Leonis Spirit of images on Tara Rueping's portfolio, which has since been taken down. The artwork before had been incorrectly credited to Carlos Sanchez. I also noticed that Gar Saxon's design asset for Twins 109 mentioned an unseen asset labelled to the episode CW525, which is that of a manned male med super commando, which practically confirms that the Shadow Collective would have been somewhat involved in this story, and alongside the Hutt carrier ship, it's likely that it depicted the events that had the Hutts pull out of the Shadow Collective, something which has been kept true in all subsequent appearances the Collective have had, including Maul's Shadow Lord, which had no mention of the Hutts being a part of it. Ultimately, we know where the episode ends, however, with Boba having created an insurrection against Cad Bane, finally realising his true motives, and is able to beat him in a duel thanks to his father's armour protecting him. The events on Sierra Leonis have now been referenced within the visual guide for The Mandalorian, which released a few months ago in April 2026, where Pablo Hidalgo specifically refers to it as the quote, shootout at Sierra Leonis, with it yet again increasing how many times this unproduced arc has now been referenced as having happened. Though it also seems to confirm that Suji's blaster isn't the same one as Boba's, though this could be due to Pablo not wanting to confirm or deny whether Suji actually dies in the arc, as that is a detail that could very well change if it is ever produced. Though, if it was Suji's, I'd assume he'd have used it within his subsequent Clone Wars appearances, which he did not do in the CW616 Dark Disciple Zevis clip of him and Krait's Claw fighting Dooku. In terms of more minor developments for this story arc, the concept art of the Ronto pen, which I had linked in the description of the Bounty Hunter arc video, contains an interesting unknown figure who is presumably a minor character in the story, most likely being the owner of the Ronto pen, with them having a very unique droid-like design. Other design assets discovered since I created my video come from concept artist Russell Chong's portfolio, which has sadly been recently taken down, with one being a higher quality look at the design for the Justifier, including its nose art, and again stating that the ship made its debut within the story arc's second episode, CW523. Chong also included the Justifier's cockpit design asset, which also appeared in the same episode, confirming it also got redesigned for the Bad Batch and originally had 2 seats and 2 separate control sticks instead of 1 each. The final, more substantial piece reveals that Russell Chong had designed the Justifier as far back as mid to late 2009 under a different title, the Mantis, revealing that Cad Bane's Magna Guard starfighter, the Xanadu Blood, was planned to be replaced for quite some time, with the time period of the design making it likely that the ship was initially intended to show up within Season 3. This design also fully reveals how the ship worked, with it having a central thruster that folds out vertically in flight, but folds in horizontally when stationary, with the end of the central thruster also having a tractor beam on it that would also fold up upon being stationary. That was removed from the Bad Batch design when the starfighter was bulked up. I feel like with Rotter the Hutt's return in The Mandalorian and Grogu, I can put my theory of him appearing and dying within CW525 to rest, though he still could have appeared but not died, which wouldn't change the core story either way. Daniel Logan also said at SpaceCon 2025 that when he first read the scripts for the 4 unproduced episodes, it made him very emotional, as it would have finally given fans of Boba Fett what they wanted and what they deserved in a backstory for the character. While the article quoting Logan states that it is a quote, cancelled Season 7 storyline, we know that is not true, as it was meant to be produced directly after the Yoda arc that did get finished and would have been a part of Season 6, which was, as seems to have been forgotten by most, meant to have 22 episodes, as the Clone Wars was produced for network television to air across the autumn to spring TV season, and thus was planned to have network TV episode counts, which back then was between 20 to 23 episodes per season. Also, we know that Filoni never even considered the unproduced Bounty Hunter arc for the final Twins production, with him only ever stating that he once thought about including Son of Dathomir, with both the unproduced Bounty Hunter arc and Crystal Crisis on Utapau only ever being planned for Season 6, when it was said network TV length. We also know that voice actors sometimes get misinformed, with James Arnold Taylor having said in the past after the Clone Wars was cancelled that they had voiced 2 more entire seasons of it, when in fact they had only voiced the completed but delayed Rush Clovis episodes, the full 22 episodes planned for Season 6, and the first story arc for the original network TV length Season 7, The Bad Batch, with Bad Batch being the last story arc that had gotten full dedicated voice sessions at the time of the cancellation, while the production Season 6 Dark Disciple ones had been booked but had not yet taken place. With it being revealed that Cad Bane had a son who he abandoned within Tales of the Underworld, which was also written by Matt Michnovetz and could have very well been inspired by the story sessions with George Lucas that they would have had for the unproduced Bounty Hunter arc, it only adds to the father-son relationship that Cad Bane and Boba Fett could have had, with that revelation adding yet again another reason for me to want to see this story arc finally get finished and seen on screen, and turn it from quote, the Boba Fett arc that we didn't do, to the Boba Fett arc that we did do. There are only small updates for Crystal Crisis on Utapau, that being concept artist Will Nichols recently released some more design assets from this story arc on his ArtStation, revealing that he designed the Armani from their 2D design options to their finalised 3D stylized appearance, giving us somewhat of an idea of how they'd have looked had the episodes been produced, with the high quality models which would have been created using said design assets. Nichols also designed the Pau City's warehouse exterior and interior, with the latter having been archived beforehand, but at a lower resolution. The Armani have since appeared within The Mandalorian and Grogu. Clone Wars 3D modeler Chris boss Jonnick uploaded a brief video to Vimeo in March 2013 showing the untextured Anakin C model, confirming that the story had had its high quality models completed and rigged before the story arc was cancelled. This aligns up with how they were later tweaked and used within the truncated Final Twins codenamed 2020 Season 7. Switching to the first story arc that was actually later finished with Ahsoka's Walkabout, we have quite a few updates, the first one being that Sam Witwer has since confirmed that he was once cast as a young Han Solo for the Clone Wars, with this being the story arc that makes the most sense for it to have been for, what with the character of Nixo Kami being very similar to a younger Han Solo, with Filoni even having sketched what is now clearly a young Han Solo and Ahsoka Tano during this arc's early story sessions, though they tried to pretend it was Nix. His hairstyle and outfit much more resemble an aged-down Han. The second is that Steven Stanton posted to his socials that he voiced the used speeder salesman within the original version of the story arc, confirming that we were going to see Ahsoka purchase her speeder bike on screen. Stanton revealed that the character's name was Turb Harlick and described him as a car salesman. He also attributed that the writer of the story arc, who we know was Charles Murray, was a fan of WKRP in Cincinnati, with Stanton even getting to add an ad-lib reference to THX by calling Ahsoka's bike a Model 1138. Stanton also further alluded to the story arc once having had a couple quote canon characters in earlier iterations, with him thinking that they were changed due to later produced films being at odds with their inclusion. This further alludes to the story arc having once starred Han Lando, though we know that Han was replaced with Nix by the latest in September 2012 due to his design sheet being dated then. Though, with CW605 Ahsoka D having had its 3D design finalised in July 2012, it could suggest that they had reached the 3D design or even proxy model stage with Han before replacing him with Nix, especially considering character designs for the succeeding Bad Batch arc are dated to July and August of the same year before Nix, and Han making it that far into development would align up with how Sam Witwer would have been cast before the decision to nix Han was made. To further support that Lando was once in the story arc, we have another example of a later created design asset, referencing an unseen earlier one, this being from the first Dark Disciple episode, CW613, Lethal Alliance, which has an asset that is sourced from CW605, Coruscant Underworld, level 1313, Lando's laundry exterior, which finally gives us solid proof that Rafa's laundry in the final episode, with all its Lando-themed advertisements, was actually called Lando's Laundry. While on its own, this could be written off as just Easter eggs, but with all this information put together, it borderline confirms that the original version of the Ahsoka's Walkabout arc, at least during its 2012 development, had not just Nixo Kami, but also Lando Calrissian, with Rafa ultimately replacing him, but keeping a lot of his characteristics. Even without the surrounding information, I can't remember an example of the Clone Wars doing an Easter egg of this size. Like maybe if this was a single poster or single mention written in Aurebesh, I'd think it was one, but this is an entire laundry money laundering business named after Lando. It wouldn't make sense for the whole thing to be named after him if it was owned by Nix, Trace or Rafa, but it does make sense to be something the production team left over because it was already fully modelled and was something that isn't glaringly obvious, like if the text was all written in English. The next update was revealed by concept design artist Tara Rueping on her new portfolio, and that was another confirmation to there originally being scenes preceding Ahsoka riding her speeder bike down to level 1313, with a sequence planned to feature Ahsoka within this autumn-themed Coruscant Memorial Park, meditating with the Jedi Temple off to the distance behind her. While we did have the spirit of art for this revealed to us years ago, it wasn't clear on if this was actually something that would have been featured on screen. but thanks to Rueping revealing the full design asset for the area, we can now be certain it was. I think it was a shame that this was cut from the final produced episode due to how unique the location is, but I have a feeling that this sequence, as well as the one featuring Turb, was cut due to them wanting to have Ahsoka be introduced to the two new characters she'd interact with quicker, with these earlier scenes feeling somewhat disconnected from the rest of the episode's plot that we saw fully produced. I wouldn't be surprised if these were replaced with longer sequences introducing us to the characters of Trace and Rafa, considering unlike Han and Lando, who the script was probably originally written for, they are original characters who the viewers wouldn't have had a chance to see before. Filoni could have also removed the scenes to make it more vague how long it's been since Ahsoka had left the Jedi Order, considering it is officially unknown where in the Clone Wars timeline this story arc takes place, compared to the other unproduced story arcs that have had their core stories counted as canon, with us only knowing that it is pre-Outer Rim sieges, which is the case for most of the unproduced arcs due to Anakin's placement on Coruscant within them, and we cannot take the newsreel voiceover as fully factual, considering it also said that the Clone Wars movie arc was directly after the Battle of Geonosis, which was debunked by CW217 Cat and Mouse, which is the earliest set episode chronologically, but already has the clone pilots used to Anakin's unorthodox tactics, as well as it being likely that the newsreel was a rewritten iteration of when the story arc was meant to take place in Season 6 after Crystal Crisis. The timeline for the creation of this story arc roughly coincides with when George Lucas would have shelved his live-action TV show Star Wars Underworld, with the production Season 6 Writers' Conference aligning up to have happened sometime in 2011, with the direction the Clone Wars went in around this time having Lucas reuse more and more ideas that he wanted to put in that show, which makes it an extra shame that the majority of these production Season 6 arcs were never produced. Walkabout seems to have been Lucas repurposing some of his plans for a young Han Solo and Lando Calrissian origin storyline, moving it to take place during the Clone Wars, which was also the case when it was an idea drafted for Revenge of the Sith, with an orphaned Han and Lando living on Kashyyyk with Chewbacca. It seemed that the production team had issues trying to get the story to work, so Lucas let them swap out Han Solo with Nix Okami, who didn't have any pre-existing lore baggage, but like Han Solo, could also be orphaned. I also believe that due to how brief the Clone Wars scripts were, that the romantic angle that we know would have been told within the Nix iteration of the arc, that would have been produced had the original production not been stopped, was something that was added into the story after Han Solo had been removed from it. Moving on to the second episode of the story arc, CW606, that is titled Deal No Deal in its final iteration, we have the revelation, thanks to Will Nichols' updated ArtStation portfolio, that not only did he design the Pike Majordomo Fife, including his initial 2D design options, but that Fife himself wasn't always named as such, with the design revealing that the character in the episode's script was initially named Limu Nelso, with this perhaps being Charles Murray, intending to reference actor Elimu Nelson, who starred in the movie Murray both wrote and directed, titled Things Never Said, which released in 2013, highly suggesting it could have been in development at the same time that Murray was writing this story arc. In a Nerdist interview in 2020, Dave Filoni confirmed that at the time of the show's cancellation, the Bad Batch arc was ready to be shipped off to CGCG to get the animation stage of development complete before they would do lighting, effects, SFX, score, and the final sound mix. This essentially confirms that the three previous arcs, Ahsoka's Walkabout, Crystal Crisis on Utapau, and the Bounty Hunter arc, had all reached the same stage too, considering they had earlier production codes. This tells us that there was at least 16 extra episodes locked in to get their visuals developed at the time, which aligns up with how many have been fully voiced by the Clone Wars voice actors that weren't completed. The article states how Filoni felt that they had not really nailed the story of Ahsoka's Walkabout, and that it went through many revisions, which matches with how it went from Han and Lando to Nix and Lando, and finally Trace and Rafa, with Filoni coming up with Nix as a Han stand-in to fix the previously mentioned issues during the period when there was limited time to make the story arc while keeping it to the production schedule, with him having to write off the fact that Nix was basically a young Han Solo clone, before the show then got cancelled and left this arc incomplete anyway due to it not being far enough in the pipeline to be produced. Filoni then decided to adapt some of Nix's characterization into early Ezra Bridger as a compromise. When Filoni used Walkabout, due to it being more developed than later unproduced arcs as part of the limited 12-episode Twins production in 2017, he was able to use that extra time to revisit the two characters, which presumably allowed him to make in his mind a more believable duo via making them original characters, with both having been directly affected by the Clone Wars and the Jedi's role in them, instead of just Nix, who would have been orphaned alone and had a brotherly-like bond with Lando due to him being the only one there for him afterwards. It seems he thought that actually making the two characters full-on siblings increased the authenticity of their dynamic, which he must have rewrote a lot, considering it needed to be redirected by new directors, unlike the produced version of the Bad Batch story arc, with it being likely that he replaced a romance angle with more of a focus on the sister-sibling dynamic, and how Ahsoka had literally crashed into it. I do believe, however, that the core story of Ahsoka coming in between the sibling-esque relationship of the two characters was something that would have been present from the very beginning, with her being in this role where she's the first person to have an impact on the Han, Nix and Trace character, since the Lando and Rafa one had been the only one who had looked out for them since they were orphaned, with the original intention being for Han and Lando to mirror the Anakin and Obi-Wan brotherly dynamic Ahsoka had found herself amongst during the war, though I still think that I'd have preferred the Nix and Lando version, with the whole aspect of Nix falling for Ahsoka helping to further cement the wedge that Lando would feel Ahsoka's creating between him and Nix. Nix having a debt to pin to could have been because he was inspired by Lando, but unlike Lando, he wasn't able to swindle himself out of the repercussions, thus trying too hard to be like him, showing a starting point for the character compared to Trace, where it was changed, so it was Rafa's debt she was getting attacked for, and Trace has just accepted it due to both being used to it by this point, and because of their living situation due to the war. By the end of the arc, Nix could have been starting to realise that being like Lando wasn't a good thing, and that Lando is taking advantage of him, having somewhat realised this due to Ahsoka's influence. But then I also still believe that once he found out she was a Jedi, he'd have felt like she was also using him, and would have split from them both, deciding to find out who he is without any influence from either of them, giving the arc a bittersweet ending that while Ahsoka would have ended up on her own again, she'd have helped Nix move out of Lando's shadow and find his own way in life, mirroring how Anakin's influence on her in earlier seasons started to steer her in a darker direction. Though, in this case, with her outside of Anakin's shadow and making her own journey, she ended up steering Nix in a lighter trajectory. Ahsoka's Walkabout losing a dedicated ending to its own story for the sake of tying into the Siege of Mandalore arc that is a big enough time gap for Ahsoka to have grown in height, as seen on her Twins 109 design asset, compared to staying the same height between seasons 3 to 5, will always be something I wish they didn't do, as the Clone Wars wasn't planned to be directly serialized like that, outside of dedicated story arc sequels that followed up on older ones like the Season 5 Shadow Collective arc, or the unproduced Season 8's Saving Vos, with it lessening the story arc as a whole in my opinion, considering it was clearly meant to be a dedicated story about Ahsoka after leaving the Order, not something to tide the viewer over until the show's final story arc that was meant to actually air a whole 2 years and 2 full network TV-length seasons afterwards. Moving on to the production Season 6 Dark Disciple arc, we have a few newly published pieces of design assets, though sadly we still don't have anything more for CW614 The Mission, which, alongside CW523, the Bounty Hunter Arc's second episode, is one we know was shot and sequenced/edited in ZVIS form, which would have required not only designs to be created, but also low-quality proxy models from said designs, with Lucasfilm having released zero footage of said ZVIS animatics. Hopefully one day we will get to see what the design of Markrim's family looked like, with child or female Clone Wars Pikes not having been depicted in any project that has come out since this one's cancellation. The first newly seen asset is from CW613 Lethal Alliance, with its introduction to the Coruscant Underworld Level 1313 Bounty Hunter Bar exterior, which has an entrance sourced from Lando's laundry, which I mentioned earlier. It mainly reveals what the exterior of the bar that Quinlan Vos travels to at the beginning of the story arc would have looked like when he goes to locate Ventress and finds out she is on Pantora chasing a bounty. The design reuses several posters from previous story arcs, including the ones from the Hutt carrier ship featured in CW525, the Bounty Hunter Arc's 4th episode, as well as also containing 2 new posters, one with a Rhodian and another with a female pilot. Speaking of Pantora, we have 3 new design assets for its Dark Disciple depiction, again thanks to Will Nichols' portfolio update. First is Pantora City building side exterior Spirit of, which shows us the height difference between the upper parts of Pantora City to the lower streets, with it also using Ventress's Bounty Hunter outfit from Season 4 to give a sense of scale to the environment. The second is the exterior of the Pantora City marketplace, showing a bunch of detail for the city's building variants, while the third and final image by Will Nichols for this episode is a dedicated view for the marketplace's Spirit of, showing what the area would have roughly looked like on screen, featuring the Chairman Papanoida statue in the centre, with that design asset being something we've had for quite a while. Since my Dark Disciple video, we had an update, or in reality, more confusion in regards to the hilt design of Ventress's yellow lightsaber, with the release of a StarWars.com blog post for Tales of the Underworld, where it states that her curved yellow lightsaber is the same one from the Dark Disciple arc. However, this article's accuracy is brought into question, considering it also stated that Ventress's appearance in the Bad Batch comes after Tales of the Underworld, which has its own issue when it comes to the fact that the Bad Batch features the precursor to Stormtroopers, the TK Troopers, while Tales of the Underworld features proper Stormtroopers, plus the absence of Lyko within the Bad Batch, and Ventress's outfit being closer to her Clone Wars one with her snake pauldron. It is more likely that her appearance in the Bad Batch takes place after she was resurrected, but before the rest of the events of that show. Back to the lightsaber itself, Galaxy of Heroes would have an update after Tales of the Underworld released, where it added a Dark Disciple era Ventress, which was 100% sourced from her CW613 design assets, including the original hilt design that Will Nichols had created for her, which was given to Maul during the twins' codenamed Season 7 production. Lucasfilm could have easily set a mandate for Galaxy of Heroes to use the curved hilt instead, but they decided to use the original, thereby still making the lightsaber's continuity a mess, and it will probably stay that way now unless they answer it either by producing a final version of the original Dark Disciple arc, or by officially stating either that multiple black market hilt designs look like that, or that Maul took her hilt while she was dead, and she had to forge a new one for her yellow crystal, with the former bringing into question as to why Ventress would change it, and the latter bringing into question on whether it is actually the same lightsaber. One more design for this episode was revealed to us by Russell Chong's since taken down portfolio, that being a Pantora speeder that would have been featured either as a background element or involved in Ventress and Vos's chase to capture the Volapai Morrigai, bringing the focus back to Mark Krim, in that we finally saw him meet his end in Maul Shadow Lord, something which tells me that they didn't really have much use for the character post-Dark Disciple, as the adaptation of the script in the novelization implied he was to die at the end of CW614, the mission, which Son of Dathomir kept by having Major Domo Fife be the Pike leader in that story, with it seeming likely they decided to kill Krim in Shadow Lord after they had essentially undone his Dark Disciple death by moving the Walkabout arc to take place after it, so they could include Maul, which clearly wasn't the original intention based on their production order, with both the production Season 6 Dark Disciple arc and Son of Dathomir having been planned to take place afterwards. We have a newly revealed design asset for one of the attendees of Dooku's post-speech gala on Raxus in CW615 Conspirators, this being an unspecific Gossam wearing formal wear, which includes a removable monocle, with the design confirming he is a background character due to it stating he will have a second variant with a different texture. Concept art created by Pat Presley gives us a new look at the Raxus Overlook, the area where Ventress and Vos have their fight against Dooku, with it revealing the area to be a lot more high up and hugely scaled compared to what you'd initially think. This duel was storyboarded by Spyro Sunis, as shown in my dedicated Dark Disciple video, with Brian Kalin O'Connell confirming on Twitter that he directed the episode as a whole, and that the duel would have beaten the Maul and Savage versus Palpatine duel seen in CW503, The Lawless, when it comes to what the best Clone Wars duels are. To finish off the Dark Disciple arc, we have a new look at Tara Rueping's design of Sereno City Spaceport's exterior, with us finally getting to see its full design asset, beyond the spirit of we have seen before, which reveals it was going to reuse assets from Skako Minor, the previous episodes featuring Sereno, and the ultimately cut Coruscant Memorial Park from the first episode of Ahsoka's Walkabout. There is also a spirit of image of the spaceport's interior included on the design asset, which likely had a separate full design asset created for it as well. Rueping had also previously released on her now taken down portfolio a slightly different version of the spaceport's exterior spirit of, and alongside other examples where the version released on an artist's portfolio differs from the one seen on StarWars.com and the Blu-ray releases, it alludes to multiple spirit ofs being created as a starting point for the design of the locations before they settle on a specific and/or final version that they expand out and design the individual assets for, also making sure to efficiently note down what already existing assets can be reused or tweaked to aid the creation of the episode's prop, character, vehicle and environment/backdrop proxy and later high quality models, with the creation of the latter most likely happening after the episode has been shot in the Xevis software and then edited/sequenced down to the final runtime, as to make sure they don't waste time and money on high quality models that might be cut from the finished episode. Overall, having studied more of the Clone Wars production, I feel like the production Season 6 Dark Disciple arc, besides not yet having its voice sessions, also did not yet have its high quality models created, considering the Bad Batch's reuse of the locations from the story do not mention any Clone Wars assets on their designs, unlike with Cad Bane's Bad Batch design, as well as Tales of the Underworld using Vos's Season 3 model, Ventress's Season 5 model, combined with her Tails head asset, with its shorter neck and different hairstyle, with the last thing done for the arc being the directors and editor for the 4 episodes having edited and sequenced it down to be ready to start creating the more expensive aspects of it, including expanding out the background shots and creating the high quality rig models that would be used in the animation stage of development, being synced to the final voice performance, with it being the first unproduced story arc to not get these assets made when the cancellation had happened, leaving only the design asset sheets to give us a look at what the final product could have looked like. I am also more certain that the 3 extra episodes that Daniel Logan had recorded lines for that wasn't the Bounty Hunter arc was for the production Season 6 Dark Disciple arc, considering in July 2012, the script for production Season 7, including the Saving Vos arc, wouldn't have been written yet, as the writers' conference for that production season took place post-Celebration 6, in the gap of time between it and when George Lucas sold the company to Disney in October of the same year. I also think that it's likely that not only did Daniel Logan record his lines for the 3 episodes, but also the other bounty hunter voice actors that had minor appearances within the story arc, including Latz Razzie, considering it would have been more efficient to utilise the time they had with said actors during the July bounty hunter arc sessions, instead of bringing them back in later for their minor roles. Will Nichols has revealed several design assets for characters featured within the unproduced Clone Wars Kashyyyk arc, the most notable being Senator Utapau, most likely named by George Lucas himself, as was also the case with Bubwa Venomore and Wookiee Clausito. It also reveals that Kashyyyk's Wookiee senator was no longer Yaruwa, as seen in The Phantom Menace, showing that he had been replaced, with the post-Lucas canon expanding on it by having Senator Yaruwa sacrifice himself to briefly stop Grievous by sucking them out into the vacuum of space early in the war. It is possible Yaruwa was replaced in Clone Wars because Chewbacca also featured within the Kashyyyk arc, and with Yaruwa using the same costume as the original trilogy Chewbacca, the character may have been deemed too similar to Chewie to keep. This reminds me of how Lucas seemed to not be interested in using Yaddle in the Clone Wars, most likely due to her existence only being due to them making a Yoda puppet that didn't turn out right. The other designs by Will Nichols are female children Wookiees, with there being 3 variants planned to show variety, with him having previously only having shared an edited image of the design options for said child Wookiee model, edited together with a cut-down version of the finalised C variant. Overall, these designs reveal once more that the unproduced Clone Wars Kashyyyk arc was going to be much larger in scale compared to the Bad Batch sequel episode Tribe, with the inclusion of a senator making me think that the arc would have had similarities to the Mon Cala arc, where the Separatists and Republic take advantage of 2 warring species, with this arc having the Trandoshans siding with the Separatists and the Republic siding with the Wookiees, though unlike that arc, both species don't live on the same planet, but instead the Trandoshans are attacking the Wookiees' homeworld. The story arc featuring a senator also makes me think it is more politically focused than we might have initially thought, which makes sense considering production season 6 was lacking a story involving something with the Senate, after production season 5 had Padmé in Ahsoka's arc, and Jar Jar had an arc that started from a more politically focused angle, and production season 7 had Padmé's 4-episode arc, where she returned to Mon Cala within its 3rd episode. The Ahsoka 4K Blu-ray release had 4 featurettes, and in one of them, Ghosts of the Past, there is a blink and you'll miss it shot from footage of Clone Wars head designer Killian Plunkett and Dave Filoni, with a bunch of design assets pinned up on the wall behind them. While the ones on the left seem to all be from Crystal Crisis on Utapau, which we have seen the entire Z-Viz story reels of, the right-hand side, where Dave Filoni is, seems to show a bunch of design assets for the unproduced Clone Wars Kashyyyk arc. The design asset we can fully see on the top left seems to be a clone trooper, perhaps a Clone Wars scout trooper design, or the captain/commander of Yoda's clone legion that was to be introduced in this arc. Below the clone design seems to be some sort of Wookiee weapon, perhaps the finalised 3D design of the Wookiee weapons that Will Nichols initially created 2D design options for, which he shared on his portfolio. Below that is 4 different colour variants for the Malaya that the Wookiees ride, with these sheets being slightly different to the one shared on StarWars.com from the Bad Batch Tribe episode, but both have the same spirit of image of a Malaya monument. Below the Malaya is a single sheet of what are most likely the yellow-orange netcasters, and below that is the design of a dark figure character, most likely Major Clausito, who has darker fur compared to the other Wookiees. The second column, mostly covered by Filoni's head, is full of design assets for Wookiees, likely including Chewbacca and Tarful, while the 2 right columns seem to be more environment focused, including the waterfall asset released by Jim Moore and some tree assets. The final things I can see on this sheet are behind Filoni's head. being what appears to be Echo's more Lobot-esque clone helmet design as seen in both Filoni's sketch and the Zevis clip released from the Ark that was shot before the cancellation left it partially complete, as well as below that being a couple of interiors for Kashyyyk huts, reminiscent of the war room Yoda is in when Order 66 is activated during Revenge of the Sith. Concept art that Clone Wars head designer Killian Plunkett did for the Bad Batch's first extra-long episode before he left Lucasfilm Animation and later released on his portfolio used Echo's original Bad Batch armor design that was meant to debut in the Clone Wars Kashyyyk story arc, with it revealing that the armor was intended to keep the handprint from his 501st designs, with the concept art also giving us a slight look at the pauldrons and kama Echo was going to wear. There are some minor updates to the Son of Dathomir arc. First off, we have Tales of the Underworld confirming Towson's death, depicted at the story arc's conclusion, with her being trapped on the Night Sisters' spirit plane of existence, giving Ventress the choice to resurrect by giving up her chance to be with Vos, or to join her and her sisters. Whether this cheapens her death in Son of Dathomir or not, I think is down to personal interpretation, but I see it as Palpatine essentially locking her away from her son, which her main goal for her entire Clone Wars character arc was to reunite with and to get revenge for Palpatine stealing him. So it doesn't take away from that in my opinion, as she can no longer reach or help Maul, with him originally having formed the Shadow Collective in order to help her fight against Sidious, before Maul's time as essentially a mob boss was expanded to reach beyond the Clone Wars, which was something George Lucas even wanted to still be true for the sequel trilogy. It's also possible that that wasn't really Towson, and it was just Ventress's interpretation of her resurrection choice, like the Pool of Life speaking to her in Towson's form. Maul's Shadow Lord would also confirm that Palpatine killed not only Savage, as seen in CW503, the Lawless, but also caused Maul's mother's death, aka Towson, who was revealed as his actual biological mother within the Unproduced arc, as well as its planned conclusion being the depiction of her death, where she is killed by Grievous on Palpatine's orders. Later on in the show, Maul would have a vision of Palpatine taking a version of himself away from his brother, with this version of Maul being older than what was planned to be depicted within this Unproduced Clone Wars arc. Though due to it being a vision, it is up for debate as to whether it's accurate or not. It could be that Maul saw himself as older than he actually was when Palpatine took him, misremembering the situation, while the Clone Wars would have depicted the true version. I also think it is a shame that due to them not having produced the Son of Dathomir arc, that they could not use footage of Towson's death in the vision, as they did with Savage's, with the overall theme of Maul's Shadow Lord essentially continuing the same themes of Maul running a crime syndicate and battling against the main villainous force in the galaxy, which the Son of Dathomir arc was essentially a pilot for. Filoni, in that Nerdist 2020 interview, confirmed that he did consider producing Son of Dathomir for the final season, but that he couldn't fit the story into the limited number of episodes he had, and he didn't want to truncate it, which has also been the case for other unproduced story arcs, with them thankfully not being truncated and losing important scenes to be able to fit into a show of shorts when they're not shorts but full movie-length story arcs. With Son of Dathomir in the design phase of development when the show was cancelled, it wouldn't have had any proxy models created for it, and thus no Zevis sequences would have ever been shot, with it also being likely that not all designs for the arc had even been finished, due to how the spirit of for the aftermath of the Ord Mantell battle in CW623 Proxy War had been created a day after the news of the cancellation, as well as how the comic adaptation had to use the CW604 escape pod design for Vizsla Keep, instead of its own dedicated Mandalorian design that would have matched the area. The first update for the Return to the Jedi arc featuring the Sith Shrine is that I can definitively say that I believe that it was written by Charles Murray, who confirmed on a podcast a few years ago that he had written an unproduced story arc where one of the episode titles was a pun on Return of the Jedi, with Brent Friedman having also confirmed in a tweet that it was not written by Christian Taylor, as he had left after production season 5 to write for Teen Wolf. The second update has to do with the Ahsoka show using the generic concept of the huge ancient kaiju-like droids within its upcoming second season, as confirmed by concept art released during Celebration 2025. While we have yet to officially understand their usage within the show, I'd say it's one of two possibilities, neither of which mean the story arc is impossible to produce. The first is that Filoni is simply reusing the design he sketched up for them in this project, and they're a completely separate entity, not connected at all to the ones in the depths of Coruscant, which would suggest that Filoni is reusing another concept he thinks might not get the chance to be used anywhere else, and in this case, if they ever do produce the Return to the Jedi arc, they more than likely give the droids a design change, which, considering the story arc got cancelled just shy of entering the design phase, it could have happened anyway, as we see with many things getting multiple design options created during the early production 2D design phase. The second option is that these Sith droids are connected to the ones from the unproduced arc, and that they exist in multiple galaxies to guard ancient ruins lost to time, with Ahsoka and Sabine perhaps coming across another one of those on their Peridian journey. In this case, I could see them subtly reference that Ahsoka has encountered droids like these before, in a similar way to how she is familiar with Sith temples, as shown within the second season of Star Wars Rebels. This is another situation we've seen before, where the Silver Angel / Black Ace's interior from Ahsoka's Walkabout got reused in Star Wars Rebels for the Ghost in a time when they thought it would never get to be seen in its original form. It does not mean that the story arc is completely off the table to be produced in the future. The final point I will talk about with this story arc is my statement on it having to take place before Ahsoka's Walkabout. Since I said that, I have thought about the arc more and realised it's possible that it can take place between Walkabout and the Siege of Mandalore as originally intended, being before the Outer Rim sieges, with Ahsoka having been sent to the lower depths of Coruscant by Bo-Katan in order to find out more information about the Shadow Collective, with this being the catalyst that leads her to instead uncovering the plot by Sidious involving Yoda. Ahsoka could then decide to stay with the Jedi longer to also deal with the events of Saving Vos, with her acting on her promise to get Ventress a pardon. This could include some friction between Ahsoka and Bo-Katan, where she ignores her holocalls because she feels she is needed to help the Jedi more urgently, but also keeps this from the other Jedi, adding to their friction of not trusting her. I personally think there needs to be something added to explain why Ahsoka is so harsh to Anakin specifically at the beginning of the Siege of Mandalore, considering the last time she talked to him in the currently finished story arcs, she understood his point of view and knew he was the only one who was fighting for her innocence, with the perfect place in my opinion for this being during CW708, The Path, where Anakin and Obi-Wan are ordered to leave the battlefield to chase after and execute Ventress, Vos and Dooku, with this decision of playing politics angering Ahsoka and making her regret helping them over the two story arcs, with her giving them the chance to see her side of things, but falling back into that war general stereotype that Palpatine has manipulated them into. While this method would work, there's still some current issues, such as Filoni seemingly removing the early scenes from the first episode of Ahsoka's Walkabout, which would have more directly signposted it hadn't been that long since she left the Order, as well as Ahsoka being puzzled that Maul isn't on Mandalore, which implies she knows the events of Son of Dathomir, where the Jedi discover he's no longer on the planet. With this story arc being the first one to have been cancelled before it had reached the design stage, it is likely that it was the one currently being broken down and tweaked by the production team in order to discern all of the new assets needed for it, as well as the old assets that they could reuse when work on the show stopped. With Pablo Hidalgo deleting his Twitter account, we no longer have a direct link source to him confirming this story arcs, as well as Rex and R2's and the X-Files arcs production codes, though thankfully I screenshotted the tweets before this happened. Though, considering Ahsoka is working with the Jedi in CW705 to CW708 Saving Vos within Filoni's sketches for that arc, this story arc has to take place before it to reunite Ahsoka with the Jedi. As well as it being in this position allows it to align up so seasons 6, 7 and 8 would have all ended with an Ahsoka-focused story arc had they released the story arcs in production order, which seems highly likely to have been the case, with them sharing big connected elements. The only update for Saving Vos we have is in regards to the final sequence at the end of CW708, The Path, which has now been recreated within Tales of the Underworld as the opening to its first episode. With this having been done, it is highly likely, in my opinion, that if they were to ever go back and produce the Saving Vos arc now, they'd remove the ending part where Ventress is laid to rest, as that has been covered on screen in another project. The episode would most likely now end either with the Jedi Council scene of them paying tribute to Ventress as a friend to the Jedi, or have Kenobi and Vos travel to Dathomir and fade to black, with Vos walking into the Night Sister village, holding Ventress's lifeless body with the bright Dathomir sun in the background, as depicted within Filoni's sketch. Either of these would also allow those of us who see CW708 The Path as the definitive ending to Ventress's story the ability to just ignore her resurrection within Tales of the Underworld, in a similar vein to how they should treat the outcome of the Boba Fett and Cad Bane duel within CW525. The Clone Wars did the same thing with Admiral Trench, Todo 360 and Echo, with the depiction of the characters surviving at the end of the stories not being needed, as we already know they survived thanks to said post-Clone Wars projects. More old tweets from writer Brent Friedman have been found regarding details for his unproduced Rex and R2 arc. First off, we have a tweet where Friedman outright confirmed that the 4-episode Rex and R2 arc would have aired in Season 8, besides also confirming that his production Season 6 Bad Batch arc that did later get produced was always planned for a 7th season, with this tweet being in July 2014, 3 entire years before the separate shorter Season 7 we got started pre-production. This also confirms that story arcs produced afterwards would have also been in a 7th release season, despite also being produced as part of the 6th production season. Another tweet confirms the whole production holdover practice that was used within Clone Wars and is still used today in other network TV animated shows like The Simpsons and Family Guy, with Brent confirming that there was never a writers' conference for a Season 8, as Season 8 would have been completely full of leftover / remaining story arcs from the 7th production season, ending with the Siege of Mandalore. There are 3 tweets about the in-universe details for the story, with one confirming that the main setting for the story arc was a secret separatist base on a moon of Ryloth, with a further tweet expanding on that to reveal it was an experimental base, with Friedman stating how we have no idea how surreal the story arc would have been. And finally, we have the confirmation that while D-Squad would have appeared in the arc, it sadly did not include Colonel Gascon, at least in the script he submitted to Lucasfilm. Other info from Friedman comes from a 2013-14 podcast interview where he revealed info on what that image we have of the CW719 whiteboard actually is, with it being Lucas and presumably the head writer, Matt Michnovitz, writing the outlines / story beats for the 3rd episode of the unproduced Padmé arc. Friedman confirmed that the writers get given both these outlines and all of the sketches that Dave Filoni does during the story sessions for their relevant arc, and that they would write the scripts essentially expanding these two key things, and then they would send them to the Lucasfilm animation production team, who would develop them further throughout the production pipeline, changing, tweaking, and adding to them where necessary. A small update on the X-Files and Padmé arcs comes from who the writers could be. While I did think head writer Matt Michnovetz could have wrote the Padmé arc, which could have still been true in a timeline where they got to produce it and they needed to change significant parts of it to work, thanks to the same podcast where Charles Murray essentially confirmed he wrote the Return to the Jedi arc, he also confirmed that Cameron Litvak returned for the production Season 7 Writers' Conference, which is info I had seen before, but could not find a source to verify it. With Litvak and Daniel Arkin both having written previous political story arcs involving Padmé, as well as conspiracy-themed episodes, it is a 50-50 chance on which one of them wrote the 4-episode Yuuzhan Vong X-Files themed arc, or the 4-episode Padmé arc, with the CW719 rightboard image not giving us a clue, as it was where Lucas Filoni and the head writer would create an episode's outlines, and thus would have predated the stage in development where the writers chose which arcs they want to do. If I was to guess which was which, following writing trends seen from production season 6, which also had the same 3 key figures of Lucas Filoni and head writer Matt Michnovetz, I'd say Daniel Arkin wrote the Vong arc, with it mirroring Crystal Crisis in an investigation vibe, mainly starring Anakin and Obi-Wan, while also taking from Arkin's X-Files episodes, with the Republic government hiding some shady activities to represent how the Republic didn't just become the Empire overnight. And Cameron Litvak wrote Padmé's arc, with him having experience in writing a political story involving her, as well as Murray confirming he was a part of the production Season 4 Writers' Conference, though as we know, whatever arc he wrote didn't give him credit in the final produced version, which makes me think he would have written the original version of the Rush Clovis arc, when it was planned as a 4-parter to take place between the Slaves arc and Undercover Obi-Wan. If it is the other way round, due to Arkin having written Heroes on Both Sides and Pursuit of Peace, and Litvak having written the production Season 3 Domino Squad arc episodes, I wouldn't be surprised either. Daniel Arkin writing the X-Files arc, that is most likely to be another Obi-Wan and Anakin focused story, would also align up with how Charles Murray wrote both Ahsoka arcs, Brent Friedman wrote both Rex arcs, and Katie Lucas wrote both Ventress arcs, with Ada Mashka Kroll not returning for production Season 7, being replaced with Cameron Litvak in the guest writer role for the Padmé story arc, aligning up the writer change with the focal character change. Since my video covering the Siege of Mandalore, I had found a tweet from Brent Friedman that officially confirmed Matt Michnovetz had wrote the original scripts for the story arc, with Michnovetz most likely writing this one due to the action involved and the fact that it would have been the final ever story arc for the show, making it most fitting to be written by the production's head writer. The 2020 Nerdist interview by Dave Filoni has him imply that during early pre-production for the Clone Wars revival season, he thought that they'd only do the Siege of Mandalore story arc as a special, with this more than likely being the reason why Filoni rewrote the scripts from its original story outlines, considering it was intended for it to be produced as an animated feature, which also aligns up with there being plans to release the Siege of Mandalore in cinemas before the COVID-19 pandemic. This also explains why the final 3 episodes lack intro narrations, have title cards, and continue directly from where the last episode ended, compared to the Matt Michnovetz scripts, which would have more than likely been written as 4 22-minute telescripts for network television. The twins' production of The Siege of Mandalore is essentially the reverse of the Clone Wars movie, where it was initially planned as a roughly 88-minute long special and then later formatted up into 4 episodes, while the Clone Wars movie was originally 4 separate episodes that were later stitched into a movie. My theory of there being a Maul show starring Rook Cast, as we know, turned out to be correct. Though it is a bit far-fetched how they decided to keep Maul's lightsaber that he dropped during his duel with Ahsoka, which fell to the depths of a soon-to-be Imperial-controlled Mandalore, but I guess that just goes to show how devoted to Maul Rook Cast was that she'd go to all that effort to return something very important back to him. Maul's Shadow Lord would show that the lightsaber is able to be split in 2, as well as with Maul ultimately wielding the half that was once designed to be Ventress's saber, and Devon wielding the original half that survived the Phantom Menace. Though they could have always just had Devon bleed the crystal of her original saber, which is something yet to be seen in animation, though the perfect place for that, in my opinion, would have been in Tales of the Jedi, with Dooku bleeding his being paralleled by Ahsoka purifying the Crow's Inquisitor saber. The Fates Fulfilled blog post on StarWars.com from August 2016 practically had Filoni reveal that Ahsoka and Rex were always meant to survive this story arc, with him even having talked with Lucas about whether Captain Rex would be in the Rebel Alliance or not. Meanwhile, in terms of Ahsoka, he'd have talks with Lucas about how much Ahsoka would know about Darth Vader and his true identity. Filoni had even sketched Ahsoka riding a giant wolf at the conclusion of the story arc to further cement this, though it is likely that this wouldn't have been represented in the show itself and was just an idea. Despite this, he still turned the sketch into a more fully fledged piece of art for Star Wars Celebration Europe in 2013, after they had ceased producing any of the story arcs that hadn't yet been shipped off to CGCG to get animated. Filoni also confirmed that he had constantly re-sketched the confrontation between Vader and Ahsoka during the production of Clone Wars, reimagining how it would play out in many different ways and what the outcome would be, which practically confirms that this was something that wasn't likely going to actually be depicted within the Clone Wars, even if the Siege of Mandalore had been completed as part of the original production. Filoni also confirmed that Ahsoka was originally meant to be a passive player within the Rebellion, which is most likely where the Fulcrum idea came from, before she became much more hands-on within the development of Rebels' 2nd season. In October 2012, just after the Disney acquisition of Lucasfilm and Lucas's retirement announcement, Dave Filoni stated in Star Wars Insider 137 that he would continue to produce the show without Lucas, with Lucas even having begun to trust him to make more and more decisions on his behalf. Why Filoni suddenly changed his tune and started stating that the show couldn't be done without Lucas after it was brought back, I don't know, considering it's clear that Lucas was fine with letting them continue it without him. Work on the first half of Season 6 had still not been completed yet when Lucas retired, plus Filoni was willing to continue making it as long as people would watch it. While Filoni also confirms here that they worked on the show very far in advance, he underplayed exactly how far ahead they were at the time, with this actually being around the time that they were writing the production Season 7 story arcs, which would have most likely become the 20-episode 8th season due to the production holdover system I mentioned earlier. While the production Season 6 Dark Disciple story arc was being designed, with it also being roughly about the time when the Ahsoka's Walkabout story arc would have been or was currently being prepared to start voiceover sessions, we could assume he was talking about production seasons here and that he actually meant the production Season 6 story arc scripts were being further tweaked. It is more likely he meant what would get released under those numbered seasons, which only spans from A War on Two Fronts to The Wrong Jedi for Season 5, and The Unknown to the 4th episode of the original Ahsoka's Walkabout for what was intended to be the proper full 6th season. This video was partially created due to requests I've had to update/remake my unfinished Clone Wars arc series, which is something I don't want to do, having already remade them all once before, as well as it being something I'd not find fulfilling or would be efficient for me to do, considering my process of creating these videos has drastically changed since, including from how I write the scripts to how I format the visuals and even the software I use to create them, which would essentially mean I'd have to start them all from scratch as if they were new videos, and as I've said, I've already done that once. But considering there has now been enough new and more recently found old incredible information on the unproduced story arcs, plus I'm always having new thoughts about them, I decided that doing an update video was the best compromise. This way, the old video work continues to be relevant, while I also don't have to remake 90% of the same thing from scratch. I have plans for many new video series that I want to move on to, spanning multiple franchises, including covering every single episode that was produced and completed under the Clone Wars' original 2005 to 2014 production. My opinion on the unproduced arcs has not changed, in that I think all 10 of them are important and should be produced on screen and in their intended animated format, with that outweighing any adjustments they could need to work in a larger continuity. Not that they even need to do that when the current canon is far from perfect in that regard, such as how Filoni's retelling of the Ahsoka novel story in Tales of the Jedi, created from outlines he originally gave to E.K. Johnston, literally has Ahsoka kill a completely different Inquisitor in the on-screen continuity compared to the off-screen one. I also think that the unproduced arcs are severely overlooked by a lot of people who don't understand that each arc was more than an idea. All of them were 4 episodes long, amounting to 88 minutes each, and all of them were scripted, including the lesser known ones, like the one that minimally involved the Yuuzhan Vong, or the one that would have finally given Padmé the focus she deserves. I think it is a shame that so little info has been released for these story arcs, compared to something like the unproduced stories of Doctor Who and the Sarah Jane Adventures, which in comparison to even modern productions completed by Lucasfilm, have had a lot more behind-the-scenes info revealed about them, which most likely contributes to why a lot of people don't know the full ins and outs about the unproduced arcs, especially when key pieces of information are lost to tweets by people involved that get buried by time and threads, and the Clone Wars Legacy Wikipedia page being in need of a drastic overhaul to account for the information. I wish Lucasfilm were more upfront, instead of purposely being limited on information on story arcs that we are to believe will never be produced or adapted into any format, considering they stopped doing that after the Dark Disciple novel. I will continue to reference these unproduced story arcs whenever relevant within the remainder of the Clone Wars videos I plan to make, and I have hope that maybe one day Lucasfilm will produce them, knowing full well their importance and the demand for them. The Clone Wars' 20th anniversary is coming up in a few years, so maybe something will happen then, but right now, I hope to have covered most, if not all, of the show's currently completed episodes by that point. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos, and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment, as it will really help the channel continue to grow.